Hey everyone, Two Angry Frogs here with WARLOCK, and today we're going to cover everything you need to know to play Destruction Warlock. So why play Destruction? Is there really any difference in pet choices and what pets are best in what situations? How does the rotation work when broken down to its basics? And how do we put all of this together to maximize our play? We'll answer all of these questions for players new to Destruction Warlock and provide some tips along the way from veteran players as well. But before we begin, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you always know what we're up to next. And don't forget to join for custom emotes, badges, and more. Now, let's get into it. Warlocks as a class bring utility that no other class does and are always in demand for this utility. This includes things such as soul wells, summoning portals, and soul stones, among other abilities. Where Destruction shines is in its sustained single target damage, and especially in high 2-target burst damage with our Havoc ability. So what's the downside? We lack any type of immunity and have very limited damage while moving. Understanding how to use movement as a Destruction Warlock is crucial to maintaining damage output. On the plus side, it's always enjoyable to cast Chaos Bolt and see those big damage numbers, and we can be very tanky for a cloth-wearing class due to passive abilities that increase our health and defense. For the Season 4 rotation, Destruction Warlocks have 6 offensive abilities and 1 offensive cooldown. Everything else that we have on our action bars is for defensives, self-healing, and utility. So let's talk about our active offensive abilities. Immolate causes initial damage and then damage over time for 24 seconds. It generates 1 soul shard fragment for each hit of periodic damage, and then has a 50% chance to generate an additional soul shard fragment on critical hits. Conflagrate is an instant cast damage ability, has 2 charges, and generates 5 soul shard fragments. Incinerate is a short cast time damage ability that generates 2 soul shard fragments, and generates an additional soul shard fragment on critical hit. Chaos Bolt is our main single target soul shard spender. It's a guaranteed critical strike, and damage is additionally increased by our critical strike chance. Havoc duplicates all single target spells onto a secondary enemy for 12 seconds and hits for 60% of the damage to that enemy. Havoc also generates soul shards when abilities hit the secondary target. Rain of Fire is our main AoE soul shard spender. This is an instant cast spell that deals damage in a targeted area for 6 seconds. And finally, Summon Infernal is our big offensive cooldown that summons an Infernal for 30 seconds. While the Infernal is active, it does damage periodically to all nearby enemies and generates 1 soul shard fragment every half a second. Note that in our single target talent build, we also take Shadow Burn and the Shadow Burn passive Conflagration of Chaos, but the ability itself is not used. These are simply selected to fill in talent points to get to the next level of talents. This is due to us being required to take suboptimal pathing along the tree to get to other important talents, and has been an issue with the Destruction talent spec tree for quite some time. Our passive abilities provide support for increasing damage or reducing cooldowns so that abilities are available sooner. We've separated these passives by the active ability they support and are listing these so you can review them at your convenience. The single target talent build centers around reducing our Summon Infernal ability to a 2-minute cooldown through Grand Warlock's design for greater damage burst potential. As we mentioned previously, we do take Shadow Burn in the single target build, but it's not used in the rotation. The Mythic plus AoE build picks up talents centered around Rain of Fire and multiple target encounters. We drop single target specific talents such as Grand Warlock's design in favor of multi-target talents including Pyrogenics, Inferno, and Avatar of Destruction. The 2-target cleave build is a specific use talent build primarily for raid boss encounters that support it. For example, you might use this for the Amalgamation Chamber boss in Avarice, since that fight is 2 targets for the first half of the fight. This build pulls in improved Immolate and Rolling Havoc to increase Havoc damage against 2 targets. Unless you're min-maxing or inclined to set up a build specifically for these types of encounters, you can pretty much stick with the single target build and do just fine. The Destruction Warlock rotation is a builder-spender rotation. What this means is that you use certain abilities to build a resource and other abilities to spend that resource. In the case of Destruction, your resource is soul shards. You can have a maximum of 5 soul shards, and each shard contains 5 fragments, or a maximum of 25 soul shard fragments. Abilities used to build soul shards include Immolate, Conflagrate, Incinerate, Havoc, and Summon Infernal. Abilities used to spin soul shards include Chaos Bolt and Rain of Fire. We'll start with the multi-target AoE rotation, which is great for solo content and dungeons, and then cover the rotation for single target and raid bosses. We'll also talk to important things to keep in mind for both rotations to improve as a Destruction Warlock. With our AoE opener, we want to build and spend as many soul shards as possible during our Summon Infernal damage burst window. We start by spreading Immolate across multiple targets and using Summon Infernal. We want to generate soul shards as fast as possible for stacking Rain of Fire casts. Note that some builds include the talent Cataclysm and remove the passive talent Inferno. So for our AoE opener, it's going to be precast of Incinerate, cast Immolate on up to 4 targets, or cast Cataclysm if you have it talented. Use Summon Infernal, and then cast Rain of Fire. During the AoE rotation, we want to make sure to keep Immolate on as many targets as possible without overcapping on soul shards. Only use Havoc if the secondary enemy will live long enough to take advantage of the additional soul shard generation. And we try to weave in Incinerates in between Rain of Fires for additional soul shard generation. It's very important during the AoE rotation that you do not cap on soul shards. So if you have the option of casting a builder or spender, always cast your Rain of Fire if you are at 5 soul shards. Otherwise, you're casting builders that are wasting soul shard fragments. So for the AoE rotation, we're going to maintain Immolate on the main enemy and as many secondary enemies as possible without overcapping on shards. We cast Rain of Fire if there are 5 or more enemies and Havoc is off cooldown, or if there are 3 or more enemies and Havoc is on cooldown. Cast Havoc on a secondary enemy to apply Immolate easier to multiple enemies and gain the extra soul shards in this case. We'll cast Conflagrate if we're at 2 stacks, and then we'll cast Incinerate as a filler. Our primary AoE spender is Rain of Fire, and when we use it depends on Havoc windows. That is, if Havoc is on cooldown or not. We want to cast Rain of Fire if there are 3 or more enemies and Havoc is on cooldown, or 5 or more if Havoc is off cooldown. That's due to Rain of Fire being a DPS gain at 3 or more targets outside the Havoc window, and a DPS gain at 5 or more targets inside the Havoc window. Once there are less than 3 enemies and Havoc is on cooldown, or less than 5 enemies and Havoc is off cooldown, you'll switch over to your single target rotation. Finally, a PSA from WARLOCK. If you're in a pug and do not know how the tank is going to pull mobs, hold your Rain of Fire until the tank stops. You can waste cooldowns and a lot of soul shards on Rain of Fire casts that end up hitting nothing since the enemies are running out of your Rain of Fire area. For single target encounters, we're trying to keep as close to 100% uptime of Eradication as possible. Eradication causes our Chaos Bolt to increase all damage we deal to the enemy by 5% for 7 seconds. So for our single target opener, we'll want to cast the following. We'll precast Incinerate, cast Immolate, cast Conflagrate, cast a Chaos Bolt, use our Summon Infernal, and then cast a Chaos Bolt. As with our AoE rotation, it's important not to cap on soul shards. So if you have the option of casting a builder or spender, always cast your Chaos Bolt if you are at 5 soul shards. Keep as close to 100% uptime on Eradication as possible, while weaving in Incinerates and Conflagrates between Chaos Bolts. So for the rotation, we want to maintain Immolation on the enemy at all times, cast Chaos Bolt if you're about to cap on soul shards, or when you need to refresh the Eradication debuff. Cast Conflagrate if you're at 2 charges or need to generate soul shards, and then we'll cast Incinerate to generate soul shards. Note that if there is a second enemy target, you should apply Havoc to cleave damage across both enemies and to generate more soul shards. The biggest weakness with Destruction is movement and maintaining DPS. We're very limited in abilities that can be used while moving, so your positioning and how you move during a given encounter can have a massive impact on your DPS. But there are a few things you can do to help with this. First, know the fight. The biggest thing by far is knowing the enemy mechanics and when you will have to move. If you can ensure that you have Conflagrate charges just prior to moving, they can be cast on the run. Second is using your Demonic Circle. The Demonic Circle stays in place for 15 minutes, so it's more than enough time for when it's needed. Through knowing the mechanics, you can place the circle in the right place for a well-timed teleport and immediately continue casting. Note that the demonic circle will also remove any movement slowing effects. Third is our gateways. Your gateway can be used every 90 seconds, and like demonic circle, when well placed, based on the fight mechanics, you can quickly teleport to a safe spot and immediately continue casting. And finally, if you need a quick burst of movement speed, you can use Burning Rush. Burning Rush increases your movement speed by 50%, but should be used sparingly since it also damages you for 4% of your maximum health every second while it's active. Although Destruction lacks any type of immunity and our defensive toolkit is somewhat limited, we still tend to be very tanky due to the many passive talents that increase our health pool and improve overall damage reduction. Our active defensive and self-heals include Unending Resolve, which reduces all damage you take by 25%. It's on a long 3-minute cooldown, but we can reduce the cooldown to 2 minutes 15 seconds with the Dark Accord talent, or we can increase the damage reduction to 40% with Strength of Will. Dark Pact sacrifices 20% of your health and shields you for 200% of that plus some additional amount for 20 seconds. Dark Pact starts with a 1-minute cooldown that we reduce to 45 seconds with the Frequent Donor talent. Although not strictly a defensive, Mortal Coil, typically used for fearing targets, can also be used as a self-heal since it heals you for 20% of your maximum health when cast. Hellstones instantly restore 25% of your health when used. With the Sweet Souls talent, this is increased to 35% and also heals you for 35% when anyone in your party uses a Hellstone. Finally, although rarely used, Drain Life can be used in a tight spot for a small self-heal using a 4-second channel. For defensives, Soul Burn can be used to enhance your Hellstone and Drain Life abilities. Soul Burn consumes one of your soul shards, but if cast before using a Hellstone, it increases Hellstone healing by another 30% and increases your maximum health by 20% for 12 seconds. If cast prior to Drain Life, you gain an Absorb Shield for 30 seconds that's equal to the health that's drained. As a Destruction Warlock, you bring unique utility not provided by any other class. These include Create Soul Well, which allows you and your party raid members to access Hellstones that instantly restore 25% of health when used. Soulstone, which works as a combat res, allowing the player targeted to resurrect during combat. This can also be applied before combat and can be used on yourself for a self-resurrection. And Ritual of Summoning, in which you and 2 other party members create a summoning portal that can be used to summon party and raid members. In addition to the unique utility we bring, we also bring utility in forms of interrupts, stuns, fears, and curses. Fear disorients a target for the duration or until they suffer enough damage to break the fear. It is limited to 1 target at any time. As a note, use all Warlock fear abilities carefully, as the feared enemies can run into other mobs and draw more aggro. Shadow Fury stuns all enemies in an 8-yard radius for 3 seconds, has a long 1-minute cooldown. Subjugate Demon is more of a flavor type ability that allows you to take control of any non-boss demon and use it as your main pet for 10 minutes. Howl of Terror basically is a fear but can hit up to 5 enemies and is instant cast. Banish allows you to phase a demon, aberration, or elemental. It prevents the enemy from taking any action and also makes it invulnerable. This is very useful for Mythic Affix and Corporals. Curses include Curse of Weakness, which slows the enemy attack speed, Curse of Tongues, which increases the cast time of enemy spells, and Curse of Exhaustion, which reduces enemy movement speed. You can only apply 1 type of curse on an enemy. These are not used in routine play, but can be useful for specific raid and Mythic Plus bosses and open world elite boss enemies. And finally, Unending Breath enables underwater breathing, and more importantly, increases your swim speed 20% for 10 minutes. In the most basic terms, stat priority for Destruction Warlocks will start with Weapon DPS, followed by Intellect and Haste. Mastery and Critical Strike are roughly equal. Haste is valuable up to about 30%, and then we start getting diminishing returns on levels above that. Note that when it comes to stats and stat percentages, these recommendations are general. Your stat weights will be different from others due to varying gear sets, gems, enchants, and so on. To maximize your character as related to having the best stat distribution, we recommend simulating your character using Simulation Craft and Raid bots. Pet selection for destruction is more about the utility you need as opposed to pet damage, as pet damage is for the most part normalized now. The Fell Hunter is great in dungeons and Mythic Plus. The Fell Hunter spell lock ability provides you with an instant cast interrupt on a 24-second cooldown. The Fell Hunter's Devour Magic ability can also be useful in some situations where you need to purge beneficial magic effects from an enemy. The Imp is the recommended pet for raiding. The Imp is a ranged caster which can reduce time between swapping from one enemy to another, and if needed, the Imp's Singe magic ability can be used to dispel a harmful magic effect from you or a party member. The Voidwalker is primarily used for open world and solo content due to it being a built-in tank with its high armor and taunt ability. Depending on the difficulty of the content, you can use Health Funnel as needed, which sacrifices 25% of your health to heal your demon for twice that amount. This keeps enemies on your Voidwalker and off of you. The Succubus or Incubus can be useful in raid encounters where there is a single boss for the entirety of the fight. Even though pet damage is normalized, the Succubus ability Whiplash passively increases enemy damage taken from your pet by 1% for 15 seconds, stacking up to 10 times. These pets can also be useful in PvP due to Whiplash slowing enemy movement speed and Seduction, which disorients humanoid enemies. As a Destruction Warlock, you will excel in single target burst damage, and even more so in two target cleave. We bring unique utility that is always in demand for raid groups, and due to our Voidwalker and toughness from defensive and self-heal passive talents, it's a great spec for solo play. We hope this guide helps you in your understanding of destruction and helps you improve your play. Let us know down in the comments, and everyone, have a great day.